I attended my future sister-in-law's grand birthday celebration with my fiancé, expecting a night of fun and family bonding. However, his mother had other plans. She tried to humiliate me in front of everyone. With a smug smile, she handed me an apron and said, "I'm sure your waitress mother taught you well." The room fell silent, all eyes on me. Before I could respond, my fiancé took the mic to give a toast, and what he said next left his mother so mortified that she burst into tears and fled the party. To give some background, I'm 25, and I recently got engaged to my fiancé, Mike, who is also 25. We've been together for nearly 7 years, and while I've always gotten along with his family, there has been one glaring exception: his mother, Sydney. She has never hidden her disdain for me, and the reason is simple. She believes I don't come from the right kind of family. Mike's family is wealthy, and Sydney is the textbook definition of a snob. Every interaction I've had with her over the years has been laced with subtle, and sometimes not so subtle, jabs. Despite my best efforts to be polite and cordial, nothing I did was ever good enough for her. Eventually, I learned to keep my distance, and thankfully, so did Mike. Neither of us enjoys confrontation, so we often brushed off her behavior as petty and unworthy of a reaction. But what happened at my sister-in-law's birthday party changed everything. Jess, Mike's younger sister, had just turned 21, and their father went all out to throw her a lavish party. It was a big event, and even my mother was invited. This made what happened even worse. It wasn't just humiliating for me, but for her as well. By the time Mike and I arrived, the party was already in full swing. A few minutes later, my mom showed up, and that's when Sydney made her move. She called us both over, acting unusually sweet, and introduced us to a group of her friends and other guests. Her overly pleasant demeanor instantly put me on edge. This wasn't like her at all. Even Mike sensed something was off, so he stayed close to me. Then, in front of everyone, she announced that she had a special gift for me. She claimed she hadn't given me anything after our engagement and wanted to officially welcome me into the family. For a brief moment, I actually believed she was trying to turn a new leaf, maybe even accepting me after all these years. I was wrong. She handed me a beautifully wrapped box and urged me to open it. As I pulled off the wrapping, I was met with an apron. Confused, I stared at it, unsure of what to say. I'm not much of a cook, nor do I have any particular interest in it, so the gift made no sense. And then, Sydney drove the dagger in deeper. With a smirk, she said, "Now it's time to get to work. I'm sure your waitress mother taught you well." The smug satisfaction on her face made my blood boil. But before I could even process how to respond, Mike took matters into his own hands, and what he did next was something I'll never forget. Growing up, it was just me and my mom. She raised me on her own after my father walked out before I was even born. He never paid child support, never checked in, never existed in our lives. My grandparents helped when they could, but they couldn't support us financially, so my mom had to make it work on her own. She had been in college, close to finishing her degree, but with no financial help, she had no choice but to drop out in her final year. From that point on, she took whatever job she could find just to keep food on the table. One of those jobs was waitressing, and she did that until I was in middle school. After that, she got into sales, which paid better, and she stuck with it. I have never been ashamed of my mother's struggle. In fact, I admire her more than words can express. She sacrificed everything for me, making sure I never felt like I was lacking, even when things were tough. Unlike Mike's family, I didn't grow up with generational wealth, but that has never been something I resented. The values my mom taught me, hard work, resilience, and gratitude, mean far more to me than money ever could. And no matter how much Sydney looked down on us, I would never be embarrassed by my mom's past. But that night at the party, Sydney's goal was to humiliate both of us, and I knew it. I was so caught off guard that I froze on the spot, unable to say anything. The room fell into an uncomfortable silence, and I could feel the weight of everyone's stares. My mom was on the verge of tears, and I just stood there, utterly stunned. I didn't have to worry for long, though, because Mike stepped in. Unlike his mother, he didn't resort to low blows or petty insults. Instead, he grabbed the mic from the karaoke setup nearby and called for everyone's attention. His voice was strong, confident, and unwavering, instantly pulling focus away from Sydney's cruel stunt. With a smile, he began his toast, thanking his father for throwing such a lavish party for Jess's 21st birthday. Then, His tone shifted slightly as he remarked that a decade ago, such an extravagant celebration might have been unimaginable for their family. At first, people were confused, until he elaborated. He revealed a truth that Sydney had worked very hard to bury. About 10 years ago, Sydney's parents, Mike's grandparents, had gone bankrupt. They lost nearly everything and were forced to rely entirely on Mike's father for financial support. It was a difficult time, one that the family preferred to pretend never happened, but it was the reality. At the time, Mike's father had been running his own father's business and was doing reasonably well. However, supporting an entire additional household was no small burden, especially since he had dreams of launching his own company. Unfortunately, those plans had to be put on hold indefinitely, as every spare dollar was needed to keep Sydney's parents afloat. As Mike spoke, the room remained eerily silent. Sydney's face had drained of all color. The same woman who had just tried to shame my mother for being a waitress was now being confronted with her own family's past, a past she had desperately tried to erase. And Mike wasn't finished yet. The real issue wasn't just that Sydney's parents had gone bankrupt. It was that they refused to adjust their lifestyle, even when they had no money left. Instead of making sacrifices or learning from their mistakes, they carried on as if nothing had changed, pretending that the wealth they were flaunting was still their own. The truth was far less glamorous. They had run their own business for years, but their downfall wasn't bad luck. It was sheer financial irresponsibility. They refused to adapt, made reckless choices, and when their empire crumbled, they leaned entirely on Mike's father for support. But they never admitted it. They never told anyone that their luxurious lifestyle was only possible because my father-in-law was footing the bill. And Sydney? She had never contributed a dime. She married right out of college and never worked a single day in her life. She made sure she wouldn't have to, carefully maintaining the lavish lifestyle she had grown up with, without ever earning it. Mike didn't hold back. He told the entire room that Sydney's parents had lived off his father's money until the day they died, and that she had never once acknowledged it. No one in their family dared to speak about it. But he was bringing it up now because he wanted his mother to understand just how hypocritical she was. She had spent years looking down on me for not coming from wealth. She had hinted, time and time again, that I was with Mike for his money. But in reality, the only person in this family who had truly depended on someone else's wealth was her. He turned to face her directly and said, "At least her mother worked for what she had. At least she made an honest living, raised her daughter without any help, and supported her family on her own. What about you? You and your parents had every resource in the world, and yet you still ended up relying on my dad. And you still do." The entire room was dead silent. Then he delivered the final blow. He reminded her that if my father-in-law ever decided to leave, she would have nothing. She had never built anything of her own, never contributed to the household, never even raised her own children. Mike and his sister had practically been raised by nannies. The house ran smoothly thanks to staff. Her biggest responsibilities in life had been shopping sprees and luxury vacations, all paid for by her husband's hard work. And yet, she had the audacity to try to shame me and my mother. He ended his speech by holding up the apron she had given me and saying, "If this was meant to humiliate her, it's not the gotcha moment you think it is. It's just a pathetic attempt to tear down someone better than you. And I'm ashamed to call you my mother." Sydney's face was frozen in shock. The guests didn't know where to look. Then, just as suddenly as she had put me on the spot, she burst into tears and ran out of the room. Mike wasn't finished yet. He turned back to me and said that even if my mom wouldn't be able to leave me much financially, she had already given me something far more valuable: memories, love, resilience, and the lessons of a hard-working, honest life. And that, he said, was more than Sydney could ever offer. Then, without hesitation, Mike took my hand, turned to my mom, and said, "Come on, let's go." He led us out of the party without looking back, leaving behind a stunned crowd and a mother-in-law who had just been publicly exposed. We didn't speak a single word until we were in the car. The moment the doors closed, my mom broke down, tears streaming down her face as she thanked Mike over and over again. Even then, I couldn't find the words. I just sat there, crying quietly, overwhelmed with happiness. In that moment, I knew I had made the right choice. I had chosen a man who would stand up for me, who would stand up for my mother, and who wouldn't let anyone, not even his own family, disrespect us. To be honest, Despite everything, it turned out to be a great night for us. When we got home after dropping my mom off, Mike apologized. He told me he regretted not standing up to his mother sooner. He thought that if he had confronted her earlier, she wouldn't have had the nerve to pull something like this, thinking she could get away with it. But I didn't blame him. I understood why he had chosen to ignore her petty behavior in the past. If I were in his shoes, I wouldn't have wanted to start fights with someone I had to see regularly, especially over small, passive-aggressive remarks. Her attitude toward me had always been dismissive, but it never actually hurt me, so neither of us ever saw the point in making a big deal out of it. We never imagined she'd take things this far, to outright humiliate me and my mother in front of a crowd. And truthfully, before this, I had a great relationship with the rest of his family. His father and sister had never been an issue, so avoiding direct conflict with Sydney just made family gatherings easier. That's why we had never escalated things before. But now, even the rest of the family seemed to be against us. It had been a few days since the party, and while Sydney had completely ghosted us, Mike's father and Jess had sent countless messages. Heated arguments had erupted over the phone. They felt the speech had been completely uncalled for. Jess later told us that after we left, Sydney had locked herself in a room, crying hysterically. She was so embarrassed that she couldn't even face anyone. And now, my father-in-law was saying that Mike should have handled it differently. He thought if we were that offended, we should have simply left to cool off or confronted Sydney privately, instead of exposing deeply personal family matters in front of everyone. But what do you think? Were we in the wrong? Sydney absolutely crossed the line. Publicly humiliating you and your mother with a gift meant to mock her past as a waitress was cruel and completely uncalled for. She intended to belittle you, and she did it in front of an audience, which means she had no issue with making the situation public herself. Mike defended you and your mother fiercely, and everything he said was true. But the reason his father and Jess are upset isn't because of the truth itself. It's because of the way it was delivered. By making that speech in front of everyone, Mike didn't just shut his mother down. He publicly exposed deeply personal and embarrassing details about her and her parents. That's why they're saying it was an overreaction. Here's the core issue. Sydney threw the first punch, but Mike didn't just punch back. He hit with everything he had. His response was satisfying and probably well-deserved, but it escalated the situation in a way that made reconciliation with his family much harder. Are you the a-holes? Not for standing up for yourselves, but maybe for the way it was handled. Instead of matching Sydney's cruelty with private confrontation, Mike went nuclear in front of an audience. The result? His father and sister now feel like he is the one who humiliated the family. That being said, Sydney brought this on herself. She had no problem humiliating others, but the moment she was on the receiving end, she crumbled. If she hadn't tried to belittle you and your mom, none of this would have happened. Possible solutions? If you want to move forward and stop the family drama, Mike could acknowledge that while everything he said was true, the way he said it might have been too much. Not an apology for standing up for you, but an acknowledgement that emotions were high and things got out of hand. That might help de-escalate things with his father and Jess. But should you apologize to Sydney? Absolutely not. She played a cruel game and lost. Update 1. Hey Reddit. First off, I just want to say a huge thank you for all the comments and advice. So many of you took the time to help us out, and I truly appreciate it. A lot of people were divided on whether we handled things the right way, and honestly, we struggled with that decision ourselves. After talking it over with our friends and my mom, we finally decided on a course of action. We've agreed to apologize to Mike's father and sister for bringing up private family matters so publicly, but we won't be apologizing to his mother. Even they acknowledged that what Sydney did was completely unacceptable. In hindsight, we realize we shouldn't have gone into so much detail in front of a crowd, especially since Mike's father was uncomfortable with it. They already disapproved of Sydney's actions, so it probably wasn't necessary to drag them into the situation so publicly. For that part, we're willing to apologize, but nothing more. Mike's family has always been kind to me, so I don't mind admitting that we may have crossed a line by discussing things they wanted to keep private. But aside from that, we don't feel there's anything else to apologize for, especially since Sydney hasn't even apologized to us. Frankly, I don't care if she never apologizes to me, but she absolutely owes my mom an apology. It's one thing if she doesn't like me, but my mother has been nothing but kind to everyone, including Mike. She didn't deserve any of this. Up until now, Mike's family has always subtly defended me whenever Sydney acted out, and I really hope they'll do the right thing this time, because now it truly matters. It's been a little over a week since the party incident, and we haven't spoken much with Mike's family since. But in a few hours, we'll be sending them an email acknowledging everything I just wrote here, and from there, we'll see how they respond. Now that the main issue is out of the way, I want to address some things that people seemed confused about in the comments of my original post. First, a lot of people were wondering why I kept saying we when it was Mike who gave the speech. I didn't think it mattered, so I didn't explain it before, but since so many people asked, Mike and I don't see ourselves as separate in this situation. We're a unit, and that's why I've been using we. The second big question was about Sydney's parents, why they never went back to work after their business failed, and why they relied on my father-in-law for the rest of their lives. Honestly, I can't answer that. I only knew them for a couple of years, and we were never particularly close. From my experience, they were just like Sydney, snobbish and elitist, so they were always curt with me. Before I ever had a chance to get to know them well, they both passed away within a few years of each other. What I do know is that they both came from wealthy business families and inherited a lot of money, which they used to start their own company. At first, they did really well, but over time, they started losing their touch, and eventually, they went bankrupt. Instead of relying on my father-in-law for just a few years to get back on their feet, they completely depended on him for the rest of their lives and never attempted to work again. No one ever questioned them about it, so we don't really know why. I actually didn't even know about this until the party incident because Mike's family avoids talking about it, and even he had never brought it up before. He told me later that he had been taught from a young age that this was a topic that should never be discussed, so he kept quiet, even around me. I don't really understand why, but I didn't push him on it. So, to sum it up, we're not exactly sure why Sydney's parents never tried to work again. Maybe they just didn't think they needed to. As long as they had someone to fund their lifestyle, it didn't seem to matter to them where the money came from. My father-in-law never let them see how much of a burden it was on him, how he had to put his own dreams on hold for their sake, so they had no reason to worry. And judging by the way Sydney turned out, I doubt they would have cared anyway. But at the end of the day, that's none of my business. Update 2. 2 days ago, I posted an update about how Mike and I were planning to send an email to his father and sister explaining everything. You can find the details in my last update. Anyway, we didn't hear from them until a couple of hours ago, and now we have mixed feelings about their response. Jess replied on behalf of both herself and their father. She said they understood that things had reached a breaking point for us, which is why Mike reacted so strongly. However, that didn't change the fact that what he did was still wrong. According to them, simply acknowledging it and offering what they saw as a half-hearted apology didn't make it right, because now, their family drama had been exposed to everyone. They had kept it under wraps for a long time, but now, thanks to Mike, their father and Sydney were the ones being gossiped about. In their eyes, Mike had damaged his own family's reputation in the process of defending my honor or whatever. They also felt like our apology wasn't genuine since, to them, it sounded like we were just sorry that they were upset, not sorry for what happened in the first place. Honestly, I don't think that's a valid point, so I'm not sure how to feel about it. But one thing we all seem to agree on is that Sydney was completely in the wrong. They even acknowledged that in the email. They said they had spent the last couple of days reflecting on everything and had told Sydney she needed to apologize to us. They made it clear to her that playing the victim wasn't going to work. If she was so upset that Mike publicly called her out and mentioned her parents, then she was being a hypocrite because she was trying to do the exact same thing by humiliating me and my mom, for no real reason other than the fact that she didn't like us. If she couldn't handle it, she shouldn't have dished it out in the first place. And at the end of the day, she couldn't even deny what Mike said because it was all true. Now she's not speaking to them either and is completely on her own. I'm glad they aren't siding with her, but overall, their email left us feeling conflicted. Right now, Mike and I aren't sure how to respond, so we've decided to take a couple of days to think it over before replying. In the meantime, if anyone has any advice, we'd love to hear it. Thanks, guys. Update 3. Hey, Reddit. It's been over 2 weeks since we last spoke to Mike's family. In my last update, I mentioned that we had received a response to our email, and we had mixed feelings about it. So, we took our time and replied after 4 days. In our response, we told them that we were sorry they felt offended by us discussing something they wanted to keep private, but we weren't sorry for standing up for ourselves. To clarify, our apology was only for how they felt, not for what we did. At some point, we had to defend ourselves, and if that upset Mike's father and Jess, then so be it. I understand that they wanted to keep certain things private, but even if the truth came out, I don't think they were portrayed negatively. We had said nothing bad about them. It was all about Sydney, and frankly, she had it coming. We felt justified in our actions, and they weren't necessarily wrong either, so the best course of action, in our opinion, was to just move on. We figured we could agree to disagree. However, Mike's father wasn't having it. A few days after we sent the email, we spoke to him on the phone, and when we reiterated our stance, he got really angry. He told us that if we didn't think we had anything to apologize for, then he had nothing more to say to us. That was disappointing. We really thought he would at least try to move past this, but after that conversation, we didn't reach out again. As much as we were upset by his reaction, we weren't going to back down or apologize for doing what was right. 2 days later, we spoke to Jess. She told us that their father was still really upset about how things had played out. To make things even more dramatic, Sydney decided to leave home for a few days to stay with her sister because she claimed everything had become too toxic for her to handle. No one's particularly worried about that, though we all know she'll be back soon enough. During our conversation with Jess, we thought we might be able to patch things up with her, but she said she wanted to remain in low contact for a few weeks until things cooled off. So that's where we are right now. Honestly, it's sad that Mike's family is acting this way. He's been putting on a brave face, pretending it doesn't affect him, but I know it does. I just hope they reach out to him soon so he doesn't have to feel this way. Fingers crossed. Final update. Hey everyone, it's been over a month since my last update, and last week, Mike's family finally reached out. By family, I mean his father and sister, because, obviously, his mother is too proud to acknowledge she did anything wrong. At this point, everyone in the family knows that, so we're just dealing with it by ignoring her. After weeks of no contact, Mike's father called him out of the blue and invited us over for dinner to talk things out. We decided to go, and to our surprise, Sydney was there. She looked just as shocked to see us as we were to see her, but the moment she realized it was us, she made a face and left the room. Mike's father just waved it off and told us to ignore her, because really, what else could we do? Dinner was surprisingly smooth. His father apologized for how he had reacted, admitting that he had taken everything too seriously. Over the past few weeks, he had done some real introspection and realized that we were right. None of us were necessarily wrong. We just had different perspectives. And in the end, holding on to this conflict wasn't worth losing his relationship with his son. With our wedding coming up soon, he made it clear that he wanted to be involved, and he didn't want this passive-aggressive silent treatment to continue. Jess backed him up completely, and honestly, once that was out in the open, it didn't take long to sort everything out. So, we've decided to let bygones be bygones. They want us in their lives, and we want them in ours, so we're moving forward. As for Sydney, she can do whatever she wants. It's not our problem anymore. We're not even expecting an apology from her at this point, because, either way, she's not getting an invite to the wedding. So really, it doesn't make a difference. And with that, I think this chapter is finally closed. Thanks for following along.